Before I share my story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt erased by someone you gave everything to? If my words touch you, please support this channel by subscribing and leaving a comment about your own experience. Your voice matters, and together we create a place where no story is forgotten. When I reached the church door, my hands trembling against the polished wood, I never imagined the words that would slice through me like a blade. She looked at me, her eyes colder than stone, and said with a calmness that felt rehearsed, "Today, you don't come in. You are no longer part of my life. The one walking me down the aisle will be his mother." In that instant, the ground beneath me shattered. Years of sacrifice, nights of working double shifts, mornings of leaving my body aching and my eyes red from exhaustion, all dissolved into nothing under that single sentence. The scent of lilies drifting from inside the church seemed to mock me, each flower a reminder of a celebration I was not allowed to witness, though I had been the one who had fought so hard to keep her life together. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, as people around us turned their faces, whispering, trying not to stare but failing miserably. My daughter's white dress gleamed like sunlight cutting through glass, her veil catching the faint breeze, but her words were darker than any storm I had ever known. I felt the eyes of strangers judging me, wondering what kind of mother must have sinned so greatly to deserve this exile on the day every parent dreams of. I wanted to scream, to beg her to remember the nights when I held her feverish body against mine, whispering promises that the world would never hurt her while I was alive. Instead, I swallowed a silence so sharp it burned down my throat. I thought of the years I had spent in sacrifice. Back in 2008, when I was laid off from the factory, I took 3 cleaning jobs just to keep her in private school because she wanted to wear the same uniform her friends wore. I can still smell the bleach on my cracked hands, can still see the bruises on my knees from scrubbing floors until dawn. There were nights I walked home at 3 a.m., odd only to find her fast asleep with the television still flickering, a plate of half-eaten macaroni on the table, and my heart would ache with guilt for not being there to kiss her goodnight. But I endured, telling myself every tear, every ache, every humiliation would be worth it when I saw her grow into the woman I dreamed she would be. And now that woman stood before me, erasing me with a single sentence. Her fiancé's family had always been polite but distant. I noticed the little things, how his mother never shook my hand firmly, how she smiled too long and too cold, how she once called me the struggling type during a dinner when she thought I wasn't listening. I brushed it off, telling myself my daughter would never allow anyone to place a shadow between us. But shadows grow quietly. They slip under doors, into cracks, and they wait. And maybe I had been blind, too exhausted from years of survival to see how manipulation could twist the heart of the very child I gave life to. I remembered the savings I broke open for her wedding. In 2023, when she announced her engagement, I had exactly $18,462 in the bank, money I had been hoarding secretly for my retirement. I gave her $15,000 of it, my hands shaking as I transferred the funds, telling her it was my gift, my way of saying that all the nights of hunger and all the years of torn shoes had not been in vain. She kissed my cheek that night, whispering, "Mom, you are everything to me." How cruel those words sound now, echoing like lies carved into my skull as she replaced me with a woman who had never missed a manicure, who had never sold her blood for rent as I once had. Standing at the church door, I could feel the judgment of heaven itself pressing down on me. My chest tightened, my knees weak, as I watched her link arms with her future mother-in-law. Their silhouettes, framed by candlelight, walked away from me, leaving me outside like an uninvited beggar. The bells above began to toll, mocking me with their cheer, every clang a reminder that I was not just excluded, but erased. I gripped the wooden bench by the entrance to stop myself from collapsing. A part of me wanted to run, to disappear, to never let anyone see me this way. But another part of me stood rooted, refusing to surrender, because no matter what she had said, I knew the truth of who I had been all her life, and in that painful stillness, I felt something break. Not just my heart, but the illusion that love alone could hold back the cruelty of manipulation, envy, and lies. For years, I had believed family was unshakable, that no matter the storms, blood would anchor us together. But that day, on the stone steps of the church, I learned that blood can also betray, and the hands you once fed can one day push you away as if you were nothing but a stranger. I did not leave the church steps immediately. I stood there in the late afternoon heat as the bells faded, and a thin wind pressed the veil of incense out through the open door. The stone under my shoes was warm, gritty with dust, and I watched a petal from one of the white arrangements float past me, caught in the draft, tumbling end over end like a small, helpless thing. It reminded me of a night in 2008 when the factory manager called me into his office and clicked his pen 3 times before saying my name. That click is still in my bones. "Cost reductions," he said, as if the words were clean. I walked home in shoes that had a thin crack at the heel, already feeling the future rushing at me like a river in flood. My daughter was 11 then, and when I unlocked the door, she was on the floor coloring a picture of a bride with a blue bouquet. "Do you think blue brides are lucky?" she asked. I told her luck was a thing you make by refusing to collapse. I did not cry in front of her. I waited until the shower was loud and hot, and I leaned my forehead against the tile and let the steam swallow my noises. The first of the cleaning jobs came from a woman named Marta, who lived on the 5th floor of a building on Rua das Laranjeiras. She paid in cash, 40 reais for the kitchen and bathroom, 60 if I did the windows. Bleach burned the soft skin between my fingers until it looked like a map of white rivers, and I learned to move silently through rooms where other people's lives were displayed. Framed diplomas, honeymoon photos with a glow I never had, bowls of fruit that were never bruised. On nights I could not get enough hours, I ironed uniforms for the small hotel on Avenida Oswaldo Cruz and walked home after midnight with the city half asleep, my head a drum of numbers. Rent? 1,200. School fees? 700. Bus fare? 108. Groceries? 420 if we were careful. The math of survival is a kind of prayer that no one hears but you. I loved my daughter with a devotion that made my chest hot and bright whenever I thought of her future. In 2011, she developed a fever that would not break. I took her to the public clinic and sat for 5 hours beneath a flickering light while the nurse told me not to worry. I remember the softness of her hair against my knuckles, the steady rise and fall of her breaths while she slept in my lap. The way I counted them because counting is what I do when I am afraid. When she woke, she whispered, "Mom, are you tired?" And I told her, "Tired is what you feel when you are winning." She repeated that line sometimes as a joke when she saw me with a mop, and we would laugh, and in those moments I believed that laughter was the bridge over every pit. The first true crack between us was not a fight. It was a small, sharp shift in how she measured me. It happened in 2015 at a school event where the girls wore navy skirts and white shirts, and the auditorium smelled of varnish and sugar. After her performance, a woman from one of the rich families drew my daughter aside and spoke to her like they were equals, using words like trajectory and networking. When I approached, the woman smiled at me with lips that didn't move over her teeth and said, "We are all so impressed with her natural poise." She asked where I worked, and I said, "I clean." For a second, I saw a light die in the woman's eyes. The next day, my daughter asked if we could not mention my job so much, because people don't get it, and it makes them uncomfortable. She said it gently, but it was a small evacuation of air from the room. I laughed and said, "Of course." But walking home, I felt taller than my shadow for the first time, as if something between us had stretched thin enough to snap. Then came 2018, when she met him. I still remember his cologne, sharp and citrus, and his careful smile that never reached his eyes. He came from a family that collected glassware the way some people collect apologies. Their apartment smelled faintly of eucalyptus, and everything was the color of creams and beiges, as if they were afraid of a stain. The first time I visited, his mother offered me tea and asked how long I had been in service. I said, "I clean, because I have always believed that truth is a house that stands even when the weather changes." She nodded slowly and said, "Honest work, managing to pack respect and condescension into the same breath." When my daughter walked me to the elevator, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "She means well." I told myself to give the benefit of the doubt the way the church asks you to give your tenth, and I paid it forward in silence. There were dinners. The table was long and glossy, and you could see your future in the wood if you stared at it long enough. His mother carved the roast with movements so precise they felt like a lesson in control. She asked my daughter about her internship, asked him about his promotion, asked me nothing. When I tried to take a plate to the sink, she stopped me with a hand lightly on my wrist and said, "We have someone for that." I felt the words cut in two directions, a dismissal and a retrieval, a reminder that people like me exist in their world as function, not family. After dinner in the elevator, I touched my daughter's cheek and said, "I miss how we used to eat on the sofa, balancing plates on our knees." She smiled and said, "We're leveling up, Mom," and the phrase landed between us like a coin tossed into a well. Manipulation is not a thunderclap. It is a slow weather, a change in air pressure, the kind of thing you only notice when the door no longer opens easily. He began to make small jokes about the way I speak, about my habit of carrying cash in an envelope, about my superstition with counting breaths. My daughter laughed because love makes you adapt your ear to someone else's music. When I went home, I would stand at the sink and feel the ache in my wrists flare, and I would lift my hands into the light and whisper, "These built everything she has," as if reminding the bones could keep them from breaking. By 2020, when the city went quiet and sirens drew long red lines across the night, I lost 2 of my cleaning jobs. We ate rice and eggs and made soup from leftovers. I sold the jewelry I had been given when I married, thin gold that had already lost its shine, and hid the money in a jar behind a stack of flour. My daughter began freelancing online, then found work again, and sometimes she would roll her eyes when I disinfected the door handles and say, "You are so dramatic." And I would answer, "Drama is what keeps us alive." She wanted a bigger life, and I wanted it for her so much that I could taste the want like iron. When she said in 2023 that she was engaged, I took the savings I had begged out of the world and transferred $15,000 into her account, and she cried over the phone, and I cried into my pillow after, because I had given her the last thing I owned that felt like a future meant for me. The wedding planning began as a shared fantasy. We walked through a boutique that smelled like powdered sugar and lavender, touching fabrics we could not afford, giggling like conspirators. She tried on a dress with small pearls sewn along the waistline, and my hands fluttered against the bodice to straighten it, and for one breath I had the sense that time folded and I was fastening her school uniform again, smoothing stray hair, sending her out into a world that would not always be kind. The saleswoman wrote down numbers on a slip. 6,200 for the dress, 2,800 for alterations, 1,200 for the veil. We left the shop in a fog of longing. That night, I told her we should set a budget, and she tilted her head the way she does when she thinks she knows better, and said, "Mom, don't worry so much. His family is helping." The word helping was a ribbon tied around a box I was not allowed to open. It was his mother who pulled the ribbon first. There was a lunch in March, a table set with napkins folded like swans. The sunlight filtered through white curtains, everything arranged to look effortless. She brought out a folder and slid it toward us. Inside were lists organized by category: venue, catering, music, flowers, transportation. "I've taken care of a few decisions," she said. Her voice was velvet over stone. She had booked the church, chosen the menu without asking what dishes hold my daughter's memories, selected music that made the skin on my arms feel foreign. My daughter clapped her hands and said, "This is amazing," dazzled by the speed, by the competence, by the way money turns obstacles into amusements. I felt the old count begin in my chest. 1 breath, 2, 3, 4. When I reached 20, she looked at me and asked if I was okay, and I smiled like a good guest. Then the small humiliations began to line up like teaspoons on a tray. A text message about colors for the bridesmaids, and when I suggested a shade my daughter used to love, peach like the sky at 6:20 in late January, the reply came from his mother's number. "We're going with ivory and sage, more tasteful." A meeting with the photographer, where I tried to ask whether we could recreate a picture from my daughter's first day of school, her little shoes pointed in, and the photographer glanced at his mother and said, "We already have a shot list." An email about invitations where my surname appeared in a smaller font. An oversight that no one corrected until I called, and then it became a joke. "Look at you being demanding." And I laughed on cue so that the room would not tilt. The last time I felt like the center of my daughter's life was on a Tuesday in June, when she came over after a dress fitting and kicked off her heels and lay on my bed like she used to when she was 15. We ate mango over the sink and let the juice run down our wrists and into our palms, and she said, "Sometimes I feel like I'm being swept along." And I said, "Then grab something solid." And she said, "You're solid." And I nodded, turning away so she would not see the tears standing in a line along the edge of my vision. I thought that moment was proof that nothing essential had been lost. I saved the mango pit on the edge of the sink like a little monument to tenderness. But the current kept moving. One evening in late July, there was a group chat I was not included in until the last minute, and by then the decisions were already set. The cars, the makeup artist, the seating chart. I saw my name not on the first row but the third. And when I called my daughter, she said, "It's complicated with his family." And I said, "We are not complicated. We are blood." And she said very softly, "Please don't make this harder." The call dropped, or maybe I put the phone down too fast. I stood in the kitchen counting backwards from 100, the way I taught myself years ago when the rent was late and the landlord's car stopped outside. When I reached 0, I picked up the phone and wrote her, "I love you. I am proud of you. I am here. Even the smallest storm has a center." Mine arrived in the form of a message from his mother the week before the wedding, formal and polite and lethal. She wrote, "For the ceremony run-through, it might be best if the walk down the aisle is done by someone who represents the new union. As you know, traditions vary, and we want to avoid any awkwardness." I stared at the screen until the words went blurry. I typed, then deleted, then typed again, then left the message unanswered because I wanted my daughter to be the one to tell me what mattered. 2 days passed. When she finally called, her voice was careful. "Mom, can we talk about the procession?" she asked. And I knew. I knew before she finished the sentence that I was being asked to step aside gracefully, the way someone asks a chair to move so the picture will look balanced. I told myself I could be the bigger person. I told myself that love, real love, is sometimes an act of subtraction. In the mirror, I practiced the face that says, "Everything is fine." On the morning of the rehearsal, I put on a dress the color of quiet water and smoothed the fabric over my hips. And I saw that my hands still shake a little when I am brave. At the church, everyone moved like a machine already in motion, the pieces clicking into their places. The photographer lifted his camera. The music rose and fell. The doors opened and closed. When it was my turn to step forward, his mother slipped past me with a smile that looked like forgiveness, but felt like theft. My daughter did not meet my eyes. The walk was short, perhaps 20 paces. In those 20 paces, I counted every year I had carried her. One for the year she was born, when I slept with my hand on her tiny chest to feel each breath. Another for the year she learned to ride a bike and fell and stood and fell and stood. Another for the winter she cried over a boy who didn't call, and I made cocoa and told her she was enough. 20 paces, and the world rebuilt itself without me at the center. I wish I could say I confronted them right there, ripped the music out of the air and forced the truth to stand and answer for itself. But I have spent too many years swallowing trouble to know how to spit it out cleanly. Instead, I went home after the rehearsal and sat on the edge of my bed and opened an old shoebox where I keep receipts for all the things that hurt. There was the receipt for the first school lunch I couldn't afford and bought anyway, dated 12th of March 2006, $8.50 printed in blue ink. There was the receipt for the bus pass I recharged the month she had pneumonia, the month I took the early route and watched the city wake through fogged windows. I laid them on the bed like paper bones, and I asked myself a question I had never dared to shape. What if being the bigger person is how they make you smaller? I did not sleep. I counted the hum of the refrigerator, the blink of the modem light, the small ache behind my left eye. When dawn came in thin yellow sheets against the wall, I got up and ironed my dress for the ceremony, because I did not know that when I reached the church door, the question would no longer be about who walked with her, but whether I would be allowed to see her at all. The morning of the wedding broke heavy, as if the sky itself carried the weight I had been dragging for months. I rose before dawn, smoothing the same quiet blue dress I had pressed the night before, and tried to steady the tremor in my hands. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and starch, a smell that had carried me through decades of survival, and I told myself this would be enough armor. Yet even as I painted my lips with the one shade of red I kept for special occasions, there was a voice inside me whispering that today was not mine to belong to. Still, I believed that if I walked with grace, if I held my silence like a shield, perhaps my daughter would see me again, not as an inconvenience or a shadow, but as the mother who had fought her entire life to keep her alive, fed, and loved. The church was already buzzing when I arrived. The sun fell against the stained glass, splintering into fragments of color that scattered across the pews like broken promises. Guests in polished suits and dresses drifted in laughter, their voices echoing against the stone. I walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking softly, the sound lost under the chatter. And then I saw her, standing there in white, radiant as every bride is meant to be, her hair pinned with pearls, her veil glistening as if it carried morning dew. For a single heartbeat, pride overcame everything else. I thought of the fevered nights I carried her against my chest, of the lunches I skipped so she would eat, of the calluses that lined my hands so hers could remain soft. All of it lived in that one radiant vision. And then her eyes found mine, and the pride collapsed like glass shattering on marble. "Today, you don't come in," she whispered, her voice steady, rehearsed, merciless. "You are not part of my life anymore. The one who will walk me down the aisle is his mother." My breath vanished. It was as if the stained glass above had fallen and crushed me where I stood. People shifted uneasily, some pretending not to listen, others staring with pity or curiosity. My daughter's words replayed in my ears, each repetition cutting deeper. I wanted to protest, to remind her of who I was, of everything I had given, of every sacrifice etched into my body. Instead, I froze, my silence as heavy as stone. It was then that his mother appeared, gliding forward with the confidence of someone who had never once feared rejection. She extended her arm toward my daughter, who looped hers through it without hesitation. They turned together, a vision of unity, while I remained an unwanted spectator at the door. And then came the impossible request, spoken so casually that it felt like cruelty hidden behind etiquette. His mother leaned close to me, her perfume sharp and expensive, and said, "For everyone's comfort, it would be best if you leave now. We don't want any scenes." My daughter didn't object. She didn't even look back. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just excluded. I was being erased. I staggered out into the courtyard, the sound of bells exploding behind me, each toll a cruel reminder of the celebration I had been banished from. The world outside the church was too bright, too loud. Children laughed on the steps, pigeons scattered into the sky, cars rolled past with music blaring from open windows. Life moved on, indifferent to the fact that my own life had just been cleaved in two. I sat on the stone wall by the fountain, staring at the reflection of the steeple trembling in the water, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly defeated. My entire existence had been a litany of endurance: factory floors, cleaning jobs, nights of hunger, mornings of pain, and yet this single rejection hollowed me more completely than all of them combined. As I sat there, fragments of truth began to surface, things I had ignored or explained away. The secrecy around the seating chart, the way decisions were made without me, the silences on the phone, the polite dismissals dressed up as jokes. They weren't coincidences, they were rehearsals for this final act. His family had been preparing my daughter for months, slowly convincing her that I was not the mother she needed anymore, that her new life required a new symbol, a new parent figure, one who matched their standards, their class, their image, and she had let them. That realization tasted like metal on my tongue. I had not simply lost my place. I had been replaced. A woman I didn't know approached me at the fountain, her dress bright green, her face sympathetic. She pressed a hand to my arm and said softly, "I'm so sorry. I don't understand why she's doing this." I shook my head, unable to speak, because how could I explain decades of history, all the nights of sacrifice, reduced to a single moment of banishment? I wanted to tell her that my daughter was once a little girl who clung to me at night, that she once promised never to leave me, that we once dreamed of her wedding together. But the words would not come. Instead, I sat in silence, the sound of bells fading into the distance, knowing that something fundamental had been broken beyond repair. That night, when the city quieted and the church emptied, I returned home and opened the jar where I had kept the last of my savings. The sight of the crumpled bills, the coins stacked neatly, filled me with a rage I had not allowed myself to feel before. $15,000 gone, given freely in the name of love, in the name of dreams, in the belief that I was building her future. But love had been twisted into betrayal, dreams had been exchanged for status, and my future had been dismantled in the process. I realized then that the sacrifice I had carried for so long was not simply ignored. It had been weaponized against me. Sleep never came that night. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional bark of a stray dog on the street. My body was still, but inside me a storm raged, memories crashing against one another, questions twisting until I could hardly breathe. By dawn, I was already dressed, sitting at the table with a cold cup of coffee untouched before me, the silence louder than any scream I might have let out. I thought of the years when I had nothing but her laughter to keep me going, and now even that had been taken away. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it there was something sharper, the need to understand why. The answer did not take long to surface. That morning, as I scrolled through the remnants of the wedding on social media, I saw the pictures begin to flood in. There was my daughter, radiant in her gown, her arm hooked proudly through the woman who had stolen my place. Their smiles were wide, their eyes glistening under the glow of chandeliers. I could almost hear the applause, the choir, the endless clicking of champagne glasses. But then I noticed something that froze my breath, the caption on one of the photos posted by his family. Finally united under one roof, with the mother who guided her into this new life. Not a mention of me, not a trace of me, as if I had never existed. It was then that I began digging, desperate to make sense of it. I reached out to an old neighbor who had once worked at the catering service that his family used. She hesitated at first, but then, in a low voice, confessed something that made my stomach twist. Weeks before the wedding, his mother had told the vendors that the bride's real family would handle the important details, that the biological mother would not be involved. Biological mother. As if that were all I was. As if blood, sacrifice, and decades of devotion meant nothing more than a word stripped of love. I felt my chest constrict, my pulse drumming in my ears. Suddenly, every small slight made sense. The way I was left out of decisions, the shrinking of my name on the invitations, the cold dismissal of my suggestions. They had been erasing me piece by piece, carefully, deliberately, until there was nothing left of me in the story of her life. And my daughter had stood by, allowing it, perhaps even believing it. That was the cruelest lie of all. Not that I had been excluded from a wedding, but that I had been convinced for so long that I still had a place. I closed my eyes and remembered a night in 2012, when I came home from work to find her waiting at the door with her report card clutched in her small hands. She had earned top marks, and her smile was so wide it nearly split her face. I lifted her up and spun her in the kitchen, the smell of beans simmering on the stove filling the air, and she whispered, "You're the reason I can do this, Mom." That moment lived inside me like a sacred scripture, and now it collided with the present, where she allowed another woman to take my name, my role, my love, and wear it like a costume. The discovery hit me harder than any slap could. I sat at the table clutching my phone, my hands shaking, and I whispered aloud, "Why? as though the walls might answer. But the walls only stared back in silence. I felt betrayed not only by my daughter, but by my own blindness. I had ignored the signs, brushed away the discomfort, convinced myself that love was enough. But love, I realized, is fragile when poisoned by manipulation and ambition. It bends, it breaks, and sometimes it disappears entirely. By evening, I could no longer stay in the apartment. I walked through the city streets, the air heavy with the smell of gasoline and fried food, my steps unsteady. At one corner, a street musician played a violin, the sound raw and haunting, and I stood there listening, the notes unraveling me until I nearly wept in public. I thought of confronting her, of demanding answers, of forcing her to look at me and admit what she had done. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. She had chosen them, and in choosing them, she had abandoned me. When I finally returned home, the apartment felt colder, emptier, as if my daughter's absence had seeped into the walls. I opened the old shoebox of receipts and small tokens again, and pulled out a photo of us from 2005, when she was only 8. We were at the park, sitting on the grass, sharing an ice cream cone because I couldn't afford two. Her smile was pure joy, untainted, her eyes reflecting only me. I traced the photo with my fingers, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. And I realized the lie was not just theirs. It was mine too. I had told myself for years that no matter what, she would always be my little girl. That illusion was gone now. But as the night stretched on, another thought crept into me, slow and dangerous. If they had worked so hard to erase me, it meant I had mattered more than they wanted to admit. And perhaps, in their hunger to replace me, they had revealed their own fear. That no matter what they did, my presence would always haunt them. That knowledge didn't heal the wound, but it sparked a defiance I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, the sun rose in a sky too blue for the heaviness I carried. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, every object reminding me of her. The chipped mug she once painted for Mother's Day, the dent in the kitchen table where she carved her initials as a teenager, the blanket on the sofa that still held the faint scent of her perfume from a visit months ago. Each memory pressed against me like a bruise. I could no longer endure the silence. Something inside me demanded a reckoning. I had lived my life swallowing insults, hiding tears in the bathroom, forcing my spine straight under burdens no one else could see. But this betrayal was too sharp to bury. I needed her to look at me, to hear me, to answer. I called her phone, my pulse hammering, each ring dragging through my chest like barbed wire. She didn't pick up. I tried again, and again. Finally, on the 4th attempt, her voice came through, cool and tired. "Mom, please don't do this right now." Her words hit me like cold water. "Do what?" I snapped, my voice trembling with pain I could barely contain. "Do you mean asking why you turned me into a stranger at your own wedding? Do you mean begging for a single explanation for how you could erase me after everything I sacrificed?" There was silence on the line. Then she whispered, "It's complicated." That phrase, sharp and hollow, ignited something inside me. I thought of every night I walked home from work with shoes falling apart, of every dinner I pretended I wasn't hungry so she could eat, of every envelope of cash I hid and later gave to her without hesitation. None of it had been complicated. It had been survival, pure and brutal. Complicated was the word of someone who wanted to dress betrayal in silk. "I was told it would be better this way," she said finally, her tone breaking, her words slipping through the cracks in her composure. "Better for who?" I demanded. "For you? For him? For his family who decided I was not good enough? Or for the woman who wore my place on her arm while I stood outside the church like a beggar?" My voice rose, trembling, and I realized I was pacing the kitchen, the phone pressed so tightly to my ear it burned. Her next words cut me deeper than all the rest. "They said people would judge. They said it would look embarrassing, that it didn't fit the image." My knees nearly gave out. Embarrassing. After everything, after decades of sacrifice, I had been reduced to an inconvenience, a blemish to be hidden from photographs. I pressed my hand against the counter to steady myself, my nails scraping the wood, and for a moment, I thought I might shatter into pieces right there. "You let them rewrite your life," I whispered. "You let them erase me so you could fit into their world. Do you realize what you've done?" My daughter sobbed quietly on the other end, but her silence screamed louder than any apology. There are wounds words cannot seal, and that was the moment I knew ours might never close. I hung up before she could answer. My chest heaved, my eyes burned, but there was also a strange clarity settling over me, like storm clouds breaking apart to reveal the hard truth beneath. For years, I had lived for her, bent my back for her, believed she was my redemption. But now I saw the truth with painful brightness. I had been used, reshaped, and finally discarded when I no longer fit the story she wanted to tell. That night, I walked through the city until my legs ached, the streets empty, neon signs flickering over closed shop fronts. At a small chapel I had never noticed before, I slipped inside and sat in the back pew. The air smelled of wax and old wood, the silence broken only by the faint creak of the ceiling. I clasped my hands together, not knowing if it was prayer or desperation, and I whispered, "What do I do now?" No answer came, only the sound of my own breathing echoing in the stillness. But in that silence, I understood something I had been too afraid to admit. I could not change her choice. I could only decide what I would do with the life left to me. The turning point had come, sharp and merciless. I could either remain a ghost, haunting the memories of sacrifices no one respected, or I could reclaim myself, even if it meant walking away from the one person I had built my life around. That night, under the flickering light of a single candle, I made my choice. The days after the wedding unfolded in a haze of silence. My phone barely rang, and when it did, I let it buzz across the table until the sound died. The apartment became an echo chamber of memories, her laughter bouncing against the walls, her footsteps in the hallway, her voice calling Mom from the bedroom when nightmares woke her as a child. Now there was only the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, and the emptiness of my own breathing. I felt like a stranger in my own home, as if every object were mocking me, reminding me that the center of my existence had turned her back without hesitation. I tried to move through routines, boiling rice, sweeping the floor, ironing clothes that no one would see me wear, but each action felt hollow, stripped of meaning. On the third day, I found myself standing at the bus stop on Avenida Brazil without knowing why. The morning sun was sharp, children in uniforms rushed past me, and for a moment it was 2007 again, when I used to bring her here. Her small hand wrapped in mine, her backpack nearly swallowing her tiny body. The memory tore through me, so vivid I almost called her name aloud. I turned away quickly, ashamed of how desperate I had become. But fate has a way of revealing truths when you least expect them. That afternoon, while searching for an old document in my drawer, I stumbled upon an envelope I had never seen before. It was tucked inside one of her old-school notebooks, the cover still marked with doodles and ink stains. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, written in handwriting that wasn't hers. My heart raced as I read the words, the air thickening around me. It was from his mother. The letter spoke of protecting the family's image, of making adjustments so the narrative appears consistent, and worst of all, of coaching her to understand what is best. Coaching, as if my daughter had been a child again, manipulated, rehearsed, taught to see me not as her mother, but as a liability. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the floor with the letter clutched in my hand. Suddenly, all the missing pieces fell into place. The cold looks, the changes in tone, the growing distance that I had convinced myself was just adulthood pulling her away. It hadn't been natural at all. It had been engineered. Step by step, they had guided her away from me, rewriting her loyalty until the woman who once called me her anchor now saw me as ballast to be cut loose. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at those words. At some point the sun slipped through the window and painted the room in gold, but I felt no warmth. My chest ached, but beneath the pain there was a spark. Fury, bright and clean, cutting through the fog that had swallowed me for weeks. For the first time since the church doors closed in my face, I realized I had been fighting the wrong battle. It wasn't simply my daughter's choice to abandon me. It was the careful, calculated manipulation of people who had decided I didn't belong in the life she was building. That night, I lit a single candle in the kitchen and laid the letter beside it. I read it aloud to the empty room, my voice steady even as my hands shook. Each word was like a nail driven into wood, proof of what I had suspected but never dared to confront. When I finished, I folded it again and placed it back in the envelope, but I no longer felt powerless. I had the truth now, and truth, no matter how painful, is a weapon sharper than silence. I knew what I had to do. I could not erase what had happened, nor could I force my daughter to see through the fog that had been placed over her eyes. But I could reclaim myself. I could stand tall again, not as the mother begging for scraps of affection, but as the woman who had endured hunger, humiliation, endless sacrifice, and still survived. And if one day she came searching for the truth, I would be ready. I would have the evidence, the story, the strength she once borrowed from me but had forgotten. The choice was no longer about her. It was about me. And for the first time in years, I felt the faint stirrings of freedom. The letter burned in my thoughts for days, its sentences circling in my mind like vultures waiting for something to die. I carried it everywhere, folded inside my purse, as if its weight alone could anchor me to the truth. For the first time since the wedding, I no longer felt paralyzed. I was trembling, yes, but the trembling carried purpose. I knew I couldn't keep this buried inside me any longer. They had stolen my place at her side, rewritten my story, and turned my daughter into a stranger. But the letter was proof that I had not imagined it all, that the betrayal was not born from some failure of mine, but from the deliberate cruelty of those who wanted me gone. I called my daughter again. This time she answered on the first ring. Her voice was low, uncertain, almost guilty. "Mom, please, I don't want to fight." My throat tightened, but I steadied myself. "We won't fight," I said softly. "We'll talk, but you need to see something." She hesitated, then agreed to meet me at a cafe near her apartment, a place with pale wooden tables and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light. For a moment, I saw her as a little girl again, her chin resting on her hand the same way she used to do at the kitchen table while waiting for dinner. My heart ached with a love that refused to die, no matter how many wounds it carried. I slid into the seat across from her and placed the envelope between us. "Read it," I said. She frowned, confused, but unfolded the letter. As her eyes moved across the page, I watched her face shift. First confusion, then discomfort, then something like fear. She pressed her lips together, blinking too fast, and finally set the letter down with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter where," I answered. "What matters is that you see now what they've done. Do you understand? This wasn't just you deciding to shut me out. This was planned, coached, manipulated." My voice cracked on the last word, years of swallowed pain bleeding through. She shook her head, her hands clutching her lap. "It's not that simple," she muttered. They wanted everything to look perfect. They wanted no distractions." "No distractions?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I am your mother, the woman who bled and broke so you could stand where you are. Since when did a mother become a distraction?" Heads turned toward us, strangers pausing over their cups. But I didn't care. I leaned closer, my hands pressed flat on the table. "Look me in the eyes and tell me you believe I deserve to be erased. Tell me that after everything I gave, you think this was right." She couldn't. Her eyes filled, and she stared at the window instead, watching the street as if salvation might walk by. The silence stretched until I thought my heart might split apart right there in the cafe. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't know how to stop it. They said it was better this way, that it would make things easier. And I was tired, Mom. I didn't want to fight them." Her words cut deeper than the letter itself. She hadn't just been manipulated, she had surrendered, out of fear, out of comfort, out of the need to belong to their world. I felt my chest hollow out, the truth heavier than anything I had carried before. "So you chose them," I said, barely audible. You chose them over me. Tears slid down her cheeks then, but she didn't deny it. She reached for my hand across the table, and for a moment I almost gave in, almost clung to the warmth of her skin like a drowning woman to driftwood. But I pulled back, not out of anger, but out of something stronger, self-preservation. I could not keep bleeding for someone who no longer saw my blood as sacred. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor, the envelope still lying between us. Keep it, I told her. One day you'll need to remember who I was and what I endured for you. And when you do, this letter will remind you of the truth. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening as if to call me back. But I walked out into the sunlight without looking behind me. The city roared around me, buses groaning, vendors shouting, horns blaring, and yet for the first time in years, I felt strangely free. I had confronted her. I had faced them. I had spoken my truth aloud instead of burying it. The wound was still raw, the pain still unbearable, but beneath it all was the first flicker of something I had not felt in a long time: strength. In the weeks that followed, the silence between us widened into a canyon. My phone no longer lit up with her name, and when it did, I let it ring unanswered, afraid of hearing more words that could carve me open. The cafe confrontation replayed in my head at night, her eyes filling with tears, her mouth forming excuses, her hand reaching across the table only for me to pull away. Sometimes I wondered if I had been too harsh, if perhaps I should have stayed, listened longer, tried harder. But then I remembered the church door slamming in my face, the coldness in her voice, the arm she offered to another woman instead of me, and I told myself I had given enough, a lifetime of enough. Life became a ritual of small, deliberate movements. I woke early, swept the floor, boiled water for coffee, sat at the window watching the city wake. Without her presence filling my days, I had to relearn how to exist on my own terms. At first, it felt unbearable, like trying to breathe underwater. But slowly, there were moments, a soft breeze through the curtains, the laughter of children on the street below, the taste of sweet guava on my tongue, that reminded me that the world had not ended, even if mine had been torn apart. One afternoon, I returned to the little chapel where I had once prayed in desperation. This time I sat in the front pew, my hands resting on my knees, my body leaning forward as though I could press my grief into the wooden altar. I did not ask for her to come back. I did not beg for the past to return. I whispered only for strength, for the courage to keep walking, for the clarity to see myself not as a discarded mother, but as a woman who had endured storms most could not imagine. In the silence that followed, I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, sharp and present, but it no longer owned me. And then, unexpectedly, life began to answer. An old friend from the factory years called me after finding my number scribbled in an address book. We met for coffee, and she laughed the way she used to, her voice loud and unapologetic. She asked about my life, and for the first time in months, I told my story without lowering my eyes. Later, I was offered a part-time job helping children with after-school reading. The pay was small, but the reward was immeasurable. Their little voices stumbling through words reminded me of the nights I sat with my daughter, guiding her finger across the page. It hurt, yes, but it also healed. Yet the letter never left my mind. Sometimes I would take it from the drawer, unfold it, trace the lines with my finger, and remind myself that I had not been wrong, that the betrayal had been real. It was both a wound and a weapon, a reminder of what had been stolen, but also of what I had survived. I began to understand that survival was not just about enduring pain, it was about reclaiming the pieces of yourself others tried to erase. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of fire, I stood at my window and whispered aloud, "I am still here." The words startled me, echoing in the quiet room, but they felt like a vow. I was still here. Not as the mother erased from a wedding photo, not as the woman dismissed for being an embarrassment, not as the shadow left outside the church. I was here as myself, wounded, yes, but unbroken. And though I did not know if my daughter would ever come back, I knew this. When she did, I would not meet her with begging or silence. I would meet her with truth, with the strength of a woman who had learned that love is not always enough, but dignity must never be surrendered. The reckoning arrived when I least expected it. It was a Sunday morning, the air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt, when I heard the knock at my door. I almost didn't answer. For weeks I had grown used to silence, to the comfort of solitude, to the idea that my world no longer intersected with hers. But the knocking persisted, gentle yet insistent, until I finally rose and pulled the door open. And there she was, my daughter, standing in the hallway, her eyes swollen as if she had not slept, her hands clutching each other nervously. For a moment I simply stared, unable to move, my heart thundering in my chest. I thought of every time I had dreamed of this, of her return, of some impossible apology that might stitch my wounds shut. But standing before her now, I realized that the past could not be undone with a single visit. Still, I stepped aside and let her in, my body tense, my breath shallow. She sat at the table where we had once shared so many meals, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know where to start." I said nothing. I waited, the silence stretching between us like a tightrope. Finally, she lifted her head, and I saw something I had almost forgotten. Shame, raw and unfiltered, softening the sharpness that had once closed me out. "I was wrong," she said, her words trembling. "I let them convince me that you didn't belong. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I didn't resist, things would be easier. But it wasn't easier. It was emptier. On the day of the wedding, when I turned and saw you at the door, part of me broke. And I've been breaking ever since." Her confession should have soothed me, but instead it stirred a storm inside. I wanted to believe her, to take her in my arms and tell her everything was forgiven. But forgiveness is not a blanket you can simply unfold over years of wounds. I looked at her and said, "Do you have any idea what you took from me? Do you understand what it felt like to be erased from the most important day of your life?" My voice cracked, but I did not hold back. "I stood outside like a beggar while another woman walked you into a future I had built with my own hands. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed me." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed, her shoulders shaking, the sound raw and unrestrained. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the little girl she once was, the child who once clung to me during thunderstorms, whispering, "Don't leave me." I felt my own tears spill, hot and relentless. But I did not move closer. I needed her to feel the weight of what she had done. When her sobs quieted, she whispered, "I found the letter too, the one they wrote. I read it again and again, and I can't believe I let myself fall into their trap. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know how to make it right." Her words hung in the air, heavy and trembling. I thought of the years I had lost, the sacrifices no one could return. The humiliation burned into my memory. But I also thought of the mango juice dripping down our wrists, the laughter in the kitchen, the countless nights I had whispered her into sleep. Pain and love wrestled inside me, tearing me in two. Finally, I said softly, "You can't erase what's been done. You can't give me back what I lost. But if you truly want to make it right, then you have to fight. Not for me, for yourself. Because as long as you let them decide who belongs in your life, you will never be free." She nodded, tears still falling, and for the first time in months, she reached for my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. I let her hold it, though my fingers trembled. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't healing. It was something fragile, something new, a beginning built not on illusions, but on truth. And in that moment, I realized that maybe the reckoning wasn't about punishing her or confronting them. It was about reclaiming my place in my own life, about refusing to be erased again, by anyone. Time has passed since that day at my table, yet the wounds are still tender. Some mornings I wake with the memory of her voice at the church door, those words slicing through me like cold steel. Other mornings I wake remembering the warmth of her hand in mine when she finally came back, trembling and broken, asking for a chance to mend what had been shattered. Both memories live inside me, side by side, reminding me that love is never simple, that it is both a balm and a blade. I did not forgive her instantly. Forgiveness is not a door you swing open at will. It is a path you walk slowly, with steps that ache and stumble. But I began walking it nonetheless. We meet now sometimes for coffee, not every day, not as often as before, but enough that the silence no longer roars between us. She listens more now, her eyes softer, her words careful. She admits her mistakes openly, without excuses. And though it does not erase the pain, it plants seeds of something I thought had died. Hope. I have also found myself again. The children I read with at the after-school program remind me of the power I still carry. The power to shape, to guide, to hold steady for those who need it. When I watch their small fingers trace the letters on a page, I see resilience reflected back at me, a resilience I once poured entirely into my daughter. Now I give it freely, without the weight of expectation. For the first time in decades, I am building a life that belongs to me, not just to the sacrifices I made for someone else. Sometimes I take the letter from the drawer and unfold it, but not to torture myself. I read it as a reminder that I survived, that truth will always reveal itself no matter how carefully it is buried. That piece of paper, once a wound, has become a symbol of strength. It tells me I am not crazy, that my pain was real, that my erasure was deliberate, and that I still rose anyway. As for her, my daughter, I do not know what our future holds. I do not know if she will ever be able to fully untangle herself from the family that tried to rewrite her story. But I know this: I will never again let myself be erased. If she walks back into my life, it will be on equal ground, not as a child who takes and forgets, but as a woman who finally understands. And if she doesn't, I will still stand. Because I have learned that my worth is not defined by anyone's acceptance, not even hers. I think back often to the moment outside the church, the bells ringing, the doors closing, my heart breaking. At the time, it felt like the end of everything, but now I see it differently. It was not an ending. It was the brutal beginning of a new chapter, one where I no longer live only for others, one where my dignity is not for sale, one where my voice will never again be silenced. And so I walk forward, carrying both the scars and the strength. I am not the woman left outside the church anymore. I am the woman who survived it, who rebuilt herself from ashes, who learned that love, even when it fails, does not destroy the soul that gave it. And that truth, more than any apology, is what finally sets me free.